You've got to get real comfortable with saying the same thing to the same people a lot.
But really what's important with the adoption of AI is understanding what is at stake when it comes to the business.
You don't need to understand what they do day to day. We need to start thinking about dev as the portal to the business.
Hello and welcome to Cisco SC Talks, where we put our partners in the hot seat and really talk about AI conversations with them. I'm really excited for today's session because I'm joined today with WWT, Benita Mordi, as well as Chris Pupillo are joining us. I'm also partnered today with Joel Sprague. Joel's at Cisco SC, and he will be leading the conversation with me. Joel, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Zane. So as mentioned, I am in the studio today with Benita from WWT, and we also have Chris joining us via WebEx. Would you guys like to give yourselves an intro?
Yes, thanks, Joel. So my name is Benita Mordi. I'm an AI advisor at Worldwide Technology. I like to think of myself as an AI strategist, bringing in both the tech and the business when it comes to AI solutions.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, hi, Chris Pupillo, VP of Engineering. I have responsibility for pre-sales, SEs, and architects for Central US, Western US, and the hyperscalers for our enterprise business. I've been with Worldwide for about 12 years and am an avid user of AI.
Thank you, Chris. Just as an aside, I will say prior to coming to Cisco as a customer, WWT was always my partner of choice. I had to get my 3 quotes the way procurement works, but WWT is always where I started and where I hope to end up. So I'm happy to talk to you guys today.
Yeah, likewise.
So I wanted to start with kind of an easy question, Benita. What are some ways that you use AI outside of work, just in your personal life?
I default to searching for things, finding things. If I'm reading, when you're reading about something and then it's like, oh, what's this word? What does it mean in context or relative to that? Those are like my quick wins when it comes to leveraging things like ChatGPT or Perplexity. I think if I think about what I would use it for next, maybe like image generation, some video generation, marketing ads or plans, we'll see. But I think the possibilities are endless.
I like that. That's really kind of where I am. A lot of the times I won't go to ChatGPT or Perplexity, but the Gemini results on Google, that always gives me a nice, okay, well, is that a good enough answer? Or do I need to actually go down to the results and search? And then I use DALL-E a lot to create memes. Definitely not work related, but it gives me pleasure and my friends enjoy it. So it's probably not the best use of GPU cycles, but hey. So I know a lot of our SEs are kind of having trouble figuring out where to start the AI conversations. So do you have like a 30-second, just a generic pitch of you're coming into a new customer or a new person at the customer, just to kind of tell them why they should be looking at AI, where they might get value out of bringing AI into their processes?
Yeah, so one example I like to use is just simplifying what AI is, and it's math. It's just really complex math, right? And I think in the same way that we leverage math to create models of like our day-to-day. So one fun one I say is if you coach a baseball team or kids soccer team, you draw pictures, you draw arrows, right? You're creating some type of model for what you're looking at and what you hope to happen. With AI, we can create the same type of model using math on like day-to-day processes, what's happening in the real world, and then eventually get to pattern recognition. So what we're doing with AI and why it's like very valuable is you get to start to do that very quickly, very fast, very repetitively for the things that are like very strenuous on, say, our compute cycles, our brains, but you get to offload that and do it with AI engines and models and architectures.
Oh, very nice. And I like that it is an answer that whether you're talking to, a coffee shop company or a law firm, it's really, kind of a high level explanation of AI that applies to any of them.
Precisely.
Take that definition, plug in whatever your data is, whatever you do, and get more value out of it. So thank you. What are some, just like SEs are new to this AI journey, so are a lot of our customers. What are some common pitfalls you see WWT customers falling into as they are starting on their AI journey?
So I think the biggest one is underestimating the actual effort that goes into it, and not just effort by way of what the technology stack would look like, but what the change management process would be, what the stakeholder engagement would be, what organizations or lines of business you pull into those conversations. That's where things kind of get muddy because you have one group who's thinking, oh, we have this idea, we're going to run with it. But then there's an executive stakeholder who's sponsoring that or who has signed off on it. And when you think about the investments that need to be made, all those things have to come together for success to actually be the outcome when trying to deploy AI.
It's also, I think, as
Yep.
you think about what Benita's talking about there, there's a question of how to measure the effectiveness of those, right? So I talk with a lot of our customer executives, and I was having a conversation with a CTO recently at an insurance company, and his question to me was, I'm not sure how I measure whether this works or not, right? Because it's not a traditional case, the way that a lot of IT things tend to have very hard cost things. So I think as we work with these customers, they're going to need help from folks like WWT and Cisco to figure out how do they do that, right? So is it FTE avoidance? Is it revenue generation? What are the ways in which I'm going to say yes, we did this and it was successful? Because candidly, for the customer to scale these initiatives as well as ourselves, we've got to get to that point, right? So we've got to help them. And then one other note, just to add to Benita's point, the other thing that we're seeing a lot in the wild is there are so many ideas that there's sometimes way too many use cases. And they have hundreds of ideas that they're looking at and really just figuring out how do they boil it down to a handful to get started with.
And Chris, just jumping in here for a second, I love that you said that because, when we talk to our customers, a lot of times they want to make that AI shift, right? One of the pitfalls that they sort of have is, are we ready for it? Are we ready from a security landscape? So I'd be interested to kind of hear from your perspective, what you guys see from your customers is when they talk about security, is the security readiness there when they make that journey into AI?
I'll jump in first and then Benita can add in. But yeah, I'd say the answer is no. And I think part of it is the security is much more complicated, right? There's still the infrastructure security pieces that we all need to worry about. And I think there's some great solutions that have come to market for that. But there's also just this data governance issue, right? Because the problem when I have AI and specifically in large language models is when I start to feed those models, how do I know whether or not any of this data should be available? How do I know, the good, bad, and ugly there? So, we're working on it internally, but we see it a lot with the customers where security from a traditional perspective, but then also there's almost a new age security, which is how do I make sure that I put the right data in the right places and that it is not going to expose our company to legal concerns or other issues.
Right, and that's kind of to the point of security of the model itself, right? It's not leaking data that it shouldn't leak, it's not giving outcomes that aren't intended. And I think we've all kind of heard some of examples of that in the news. And I think for any business that makes a product or service, that's one thing you don't want to happen. So I think that's where solutions like Cisco AI Defense is great because addressing that critical need when it comes to the topic of security for customers is very vital.
I agree. And also, one thing I really like about AI defense is one of the kind of turning points in security with AI is, like traditional DLP, it's easy. You pattern match. If it's 9 characters, it's a social security number, 16 characters, credit card. But because the AI itself can think, you can give it 3 numbers, then 2, then 4, put these prompt put these together as a unique identifying number a new child might receive from the government and go search for it. Well, if you're just looking for that pattern of 9 characters or even looking for call outs of social security, that DLP is not going to catch it. But the AI can put those together because it thinks itself, which is, we're not going to get into Turing tests and stuff. But, it really complicates what we have to do to ensure that, the data that, Cisco's customers, WWT's customers, our customers have entrusted to us, that we're doing a good job of keeping that secure and really protecting those customers.
Yeah, Joel, all really good points. And I think that, when we talk about security and AI specifically, we're not just talking about network engineers, right? The stakeholder changes, the personas change. So sec DevOps, net DevOps, those are all conversations, and security is top of mind. So how do we protect that? And Benita, I think you brought up a great point with Cisco AI Defense, and that's one use case, but there's so many more.
So Benita, earlier, we've talked about your regular LLMs. We both were talking about using search, and we've talked about chatbots and stuff. But you mentioned data. So what is kind of one of the most interesting AI ML projects you've seen WWT deliver that wasn't an AI chatbot or just putting an LLM on something?
Some of the interesting use cases for AI that don't involve LLMs for me have been with computer vision. There's a project I know we've done where we've helped identify brain tumors leveraging MRI scans and using CNNs to do that work. So it's very interesting when you think about what happens and how you can actually augment a radiologist's job when you do something like that. It might take, on average, I think, an hour for a radiologist to really look at a number of scans. And be certain that this is indeed a brain tumor, but with the assistance of a model that can also do that and is trained on those MRI scans, it makes that job much faster for that radiologist, reducing that time to 5 to 10 minutes. So I think those are really cool. Another computer vision example I really like is at theme parks that we've done is just counting people. And I think an interesting thing about just doing something as simple as counting, you don't realize the insights that come from it. So counting people that are clustering in an area within the theme park, or what their patterns look like when they're in a line for a ride. And then you start having these ideas like, oh, well, we noticed that people are clustering here. What do we put here? Do we put a concession stand? Can we send actors in the park to go interact with these people? Like, it seems so simple, counting, but then when you get those insights from things like that, you can start to do different things that make not just customer experience great, but also provide revenue options for businesses.
Yeah, and you use the word augmentation, which I really like. AI, we all have these fears that AI is going to replace us, but at least when properly used, it's really helping us do our jobs better, whether it's freeing up time. So take the theme park. You know, I love the haunted house at Disney, and I know that, like you said, where the lines turn, where you're going to get stuck in things, they have the tombstones with the funny names, everything. That's purposely there to help keep people interested. But the way we used to do that, they would have had to have what is it? The Imagineers get in the lines and see where the slow points are. Do that for every ride. Do it multiple times per day. Now we can set up the cameras, record for weeks at a time. Use clustering to pull out where the slow spots are, what times a day, and then the Imagineers can then just spend their time coming up with something interesting there to make that experience better. They don't have to spend all that time in the lines. We didn't replace them. That human creativity is still required, but AI has helped augment it and help save their time. And I think that's what I'm hoping to see out of AI. Any technology, there's going to be hits and misses. Some are not going to be so great, but that's really where I see the promise in these. And there's so many possibilities that you're going to have the right person hit a problem and realize how AI might help them and go figure it out. But, hopefully it's going to be better for all of us as these things come to light here.
Yeah, that's such a great example of what it means to innovate and be creative faster.
Absolutely. I actually heard about another one just last night. So, all of our phones have, there's warnings when there's thunderstorms, or fires. A lot in the West Coast are earthquake warnings. So Google subscribes to a service that has 1,600 seismic monitors, California, Washington, Oregon, to be able to provide to Android users warnings if there's earthquakes.
Mm-hmm.
But Android users aren't just on the West Coast, they're all over the world. So what Google has started doing is using the accelerometers we all have in our phones with the course location, and now has 2 billion seismic sensors around the world, so they can give everyone earthquake warnings when needed, not just the people in those 3 states covered by that service. And it's really cool. And obviously that's a huge ML clustering where, I'm sure they were taking accelerometer readings against the known earthquakes, matched it up so they can create a data set and then know and it can offer that now to honestly make the world a better place.
Yeah.
Unless you have an iPhone, but I'm an Android user, so I'm good. So let's take a step back. This podcast is SEs for SEs. And I know a lot of our SEs, like I said, they're nervous going into these conversations, but we're doing it because, it's what our customers want. It's what Chuck wants. So we're having these SE conversations. Where have you seen problems for Cisco and WWT SEs and even other, industry SEs of a lack of training or knowledge or what we could talk to our peers here as to, hey, why don't you go focus on this will help you deliver better, maybe not be a Benita but a closer AI advisor for your customers.
Yeah, so I do have some thoughts on that. I think the biggest thing is with the amount of information that's out there when it comes to AI, it can be overwhelming. Like even for myself, it's like, okay, here we go, another thing to go understand and learn and figure out how it's relative to X, Y, or Z. I think for SEs, I think that becomes very real in the face of wanting to be that trusted advisor to your customer, and questioning what you know, what you don't know, what you don't understand about AI. So I think maybe taking a step back from that because we're always in the what's the tech, how do I solve this, what does it look like, to what is at stake for the customer with or without AI, right? What does that adoption look like? Why is it critical for them to do so? And I think once we start to understand what that looks like and maybe what process needs to change, we can then think about how to actually build the system in terms of what's valuable to the customer before we get into the architecture stack, before we get into what the model would look like, and things like that. So I think that's one of the things I've seen has been hard is taking a step back and trying to rush to what a solution looks like. But really what's important with the adoption of AI is understanding what is at stake when it comes to the business and what can be implemented to address that. And I would also love Chris's thoughts on
Yeah.
this too.
Yeah, you said something important, which I think is, I don't know if it's fear, reticence, or whatnot, but there's SEs, I've been in the SE game for a very long time. We tend to be quiet where we don't have real depth of expertise, right? SEs want to know, once they know everything about something, then they're ready to start talking. And AI, we're going to have to fight that urge because it's changing too fast. But I think there's a couple things out there. One is you really gotta understand the base terminology that the customers are using, which is not stuff that we're used to, candidly, right? It's not network terms, it's not data center terms. It's, what does training mean in the context of what we're talking about? What does inferencing mean in the context? So there's this whole nomenclature that I think everyone's kind of got to get familiar with. But you said something I think in the last question around the sensors, right? Like understanding outside of our normal IT space, like what are the sensor equivalents, right? There's a bunch of data out there. We were talking about this recently internally about app dev, right? I think our teams are traditionally they're more nervous to talk to the app dev teams, and it's because we're not devs, right? Like we don't do programming. But one of the things that I think, and AI is an example of this, when you go talk to an app dev team, and that's a lot of times, by the way, who we're going to be talking to when it comes to things like AI, you don't need to understand what they do day to day. We need to start thinking of app dev as the portal to the business, and that means we've got to have those conversations with them because that's where the rubber meets the road as it comes to things like AI use cases, right? So, and I think the last thing I'll say here is like, we've got to all be a little bit more curious and almost go back to our roots when, I don't know about everybody on the call, but when I started as an SE, I had a home lab, I had all kinds of stuff. When AI kind of came out, I was running, open source models on whatever hardware I could scrounge up in my house, and really diving into the weeds on some of this stuff. So we're gonna almost have to go back to our earlier days, which if you're a 20-year SE veteran, that's a little bit counter to maybe how you run on a day-to-day basis, but that's the level of kind of back to basics I think we've all got to be be willing to do, and have a little bit of courage to go have these conversations and not know the in depths of how they're going to apply this. You don't need to understand the software that they're going to use to deploy this, but we do have to have conceptual conversations, because if we're not in those conversations, you will not be in the infrastructure discussions that frankly we're all going to monetize well. And so we've got to get a little bit out of our comfort zone, I think, on that front.
Yeah, and Chris, I really appreciate the insight just from an engineering SE perspective, because one thing you hit on is that the velocity of change of AI, and things are changing so fast. Different LLMs, they're almost coming out every single day, right? And really understanding the back end of how they work. One of the things that I just recall a conversation with a customer where they thought Cisco was just a networking and security company. They had no idea of the AI investments that we're making, and partnering with you guys in WWT and really coming together, going to market together as sort of this one ecosystem partner. And so if we as SEs don't update our customers, if we miss the ball, to your point, right? And so those are conversations that I think I'm having, that Joel's having, that Benita, I'm sure you're having, is really educating our customers, because things are moving so fast.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that point. I was talking with someone recently about that. Right, we not only on the AI front, but even just the Cisco product line. To your point, the amount of changes and announcements that have happened, the speed of the roadmap changes that have occurred. We've there's a term I use internally, chief repeating officer. Like, we've got to get real comfortable with saying the same thing to the same people a lot, because the next set of people you talk to aren't going to know, right? Or they're going to have heard you maybe reference it last meeting, and you need to mention it again and again, because when we're moving at this speed, if you think about like trying to get your customer to understand your portfolio, it's different when it's been the same for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. But when the changes occur 2 to 4 weeks, you've got to come back to it. And so we've all got to get real comfortable with that kind of repetition of, I need to give another update. I need to give another update, because you don't realize maybe, Mr. Customer or Mrs. Customer, how much this is going to impact, your strategy and what Cisco can do with it. And I think that's important.
Absolutely. So we've been talking for a while kind of about AI in general, not a ton about Cisco, other than AI defense that had to come up. But I know WWT works with a bunch of vendors. I use my ATC login. I see all the different products in there. But kind of in your role as an AI advisor, where do you see Cisco standing out in the AI field, whether it's AI in our products or our products for running AI? Just what does Cisco do? What do you see Cisco doing well in AI?
I think I'd summarize that by making it easier to adopt, by leveraging products and tool sets that our customers already know. And building upon that, leveraging partnerships with NVIDIA to continue to do so. I think one thing that was very interesting to see this year from Cisco Live was the introduction of the deep network model, if I'm not mistaken. And that kind of goes to show what it is that we can expect from Cisco, and also when we talk about domain specific expertise and building on that, I think that's a game changer when it comes to what Cisco is doing.
Absolutely. You mentioned how we make it easy to bring things. I was actually talking to a high frequency trader yesterday that's been watching Ultra Ethernet for their HPC clusters, and they've wanted it. They wanted it. And, we started talking to them yesterday about it, just to give them an update now that the spec is out. And we're like, by the end of the year, we'll start to see things Ultra Ethernet. When then we're like, well, what exactly are you looking for? And they're, the packet spray and everything, like, well, we can do that for you in 2 weeks, because we're working with NVIDIA to get the Spectrum X offerings. And doing it in the Nexus switches that you're used to. All you have to do is, get 10.6.1 on there and type hardware profile Spectrum, and you have all those features today. It's like we're still working towards all of the Ultra Ethernet specs. We'll have them all by the end of the year, but we can bring those Spectrum features into the Nexus switches you're already used to and give it to you in 2 weeks. And that was, something that really appealed to them. That these clusters have been InfiniBand forever. The devices they used were end of life, and they're kind of, flailing a bit, trying to figure out what to go next. And like you said, the fact that we could bring the technologies that they wanted to them today in a form that they were already used to just really rung true. So I'm glad that it wasn't just a one-off, that
Yeah.
you're seeing that happen other way.
Yeah, I think you double down on that, and the mention earlier on AI defense and just security. It's got to be, listen, there's got to be a differentiation here. The differentiation is not going to come at the NVIDIA GPU level or something of that nature, right? I equate a lot of this back to almost kind of go back to the UCS era, right? Like what made it different? It wasn't the Intel chips, it wasn't all this other stuff. It was the design, it was the networking interaction, it was all this other stuff. And so, to your point, to be able to provide them the familiar, but then I think the biggest thing is the focus on security along with that networking, and we've done some studies and published some papers on Ethernet and InfiniBand, and I think we've finally passed all that with NVIDIA. And so your partnership there is going to be important, and showing in the AI proving ground how Ethernet really can be king on this. But that plus the security is the secret sauce for Cisco, because it's not going to be to go knife fight on the same features that people can provide, because it's an OEM wrapper. So I think that's something we've all got to embrace as we move forward, is get really keying in on those focus differentiators and not getting stuck in comparing too much of the like to like stuff, because there's always going to be that, and we can't get out of it. But the way that the portfolio has shifted is a very positive thing, I think, in the AI front. And there's a lot of opportunity, because at the end of the day, and this maybe really pulling back a second, the opportunity in front of us, especially at that level on the enterprise space, is massive, right? Like there's very little adoption in this space yet. Most of that's happened at the hyperscalers and as a service providers, and the top 5% maybe of that enterprise market. So there's still so much open ground to go capture, and we've got to embrace those differentiators, I think, for us all to win those opportunities together.
Absolutely. So we've done a bunch of questions. We've talked about AI. Now I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit with, we're going to call it 2 facts and a hot take. So, we did give you some warning, and hopefully you came here today with a set of 3 statements, and 2 of them are going to be facts. One's going to be an AI hot take, and I'm supposed to hopefully guess which is the hot take.
Okay. All right. I came ready for this. No peeping. All right. First statement. AI models are becoming increasingly energy intensive.
Well, that's an interesting one, because yes, they're getting bigger, but quantizing is making them better. And then there's kind of the, hey, which model is more efficient? DeepSeek is smaller, but a lot of the tests are saying the actual usage, it's burning more GPU cycles to answer questions. So, okay, let me think on that one. Give me the next one. Let's see
Okay.
where we end up.
All right. So next one. Most AI project failures are due to people, not technology.
That one's a fact. I won't even guess on that one. That one I know is a fact. And hopefully, Cisco and WWT are, as especially, that was kind of why I asked the questions about the SEs and stuff. Hopefully we're preparing both of our teams to help get ahead of those problems and not have that happen as much, at least for Cisco WWT customers. Other customers, that's, they're on their own. So let's get the last one here, and I'll try and guess which was the hot take.
All right. So last one. Prompt engineering will become a permanent job title.
That one is absolutely true. There's already jobs out there for it, and it is, especially as we keep saying with this security and stuff, that, prompt engineering is a big portion of making sure those models are secure and aren't going to do things you don't want. So that one is true. So I'm going to go back to the efficiency one as the hot take.
Okay. All right. Want to know how you did? All right. So most AI project failures are due to people, not technology. That is true. So according to multiple industry studies from the likes of Gartner and McKinsey, 70 to 85% of AI projects fail to reach production due to poor scoping, lack of infrastructure, unclear ROI, and of course, organizational resistance, like we've talked about. So that is a fact.
Okay.
The one on energy intensity or intensiveness is also a fact, actually. Training large models like GPT can consume hundreds of megawatts of hours, and also inference at scale, especially for real-time applications like AI-powered search, chat, or autonomous systems. So this is continuing to grow concern over environmental footprint in the long term. The hot take is actually the prompt engineering one.
Really?
And it's a hot take because while it is currently valuable, there are jobs out there. If we think about what we can expect from like reasoning models and agentic models, agentic systems, we expect that once those models are a bit more intelligent, we won't require deep prompting skills. However, still valuable, but that doesn't mean that prompt engineering will become a permanent job title. So I think that one's interesting. Definitely a hot take. Because it's kind of likening it to how well are your Google search skills, and then that didn't quite turn into a full-time job. So I don't know. We'll see. That one's interesting.
I like that. Yeah, that's some thought. And, it actually reminds me how Anthropic training Claude, part of their guardrails was that whole second model that had like the UN World Code of Conduct and everything that it used just to test that model to make sure it wasn't, to quote the old Google thing, not doing evil. I hadn't thought about that towards prompt engineering in general too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
You stumped me. Interesting facts too. So I think that is a great way to kind of wrap up our discussion. So thank you very much for your time. But Chris, I know you couldn't make it here in the studio today, but I thought I'd give you an opportunity to close us out with anything else you might have that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I think the main thing I wanted to touch on was just the partnership. When we talk about a lot of these customer use cases, customer situations, they are complicated. They're new for everybody, right? So if you think about how many times that happens throughout the life cycle of IT, it's not very often, right? So AI is new, I'd say, to most of our customers. I mentioned earlier there's a smaller group. We've been doing AI ML for a decade plus, and so this feels very familiar. And for your customers who live in that world, think financial companies and maybe pharma, bio, life science, stuff like that. They're kind of ahead of the game here. But for most of our customers, this is new grounds. And for most of our team, this is new grounds. And for the industry, this is new grounds. And so it's going to take a village to figure all this out together. So I'd say the biggest thing is make sure that we're all talking and that we're all planning and having those discussions, because I think there's some things that we can bring to the table as a partner that will help, and then vice versa. We really focus on these AI opportunities from the very beginning of brainstorming use case concepts and even offering some, right? Like we have a bunch of pre-built that we've sort of said, hey, we've seen these, they seem to work in the broader industry or your specific industry, all the way through the actual high performance architecture, which again is where I think we all monetize, but there's a long journey in some of these cases to get there. And we will get to that resolution a lot faster together than we will separately. And again, that's, I think, a unique moment in time because of how this is, and the customers are hungry for assistance in a way that they aren't in everything, right? We often run into customers who think they know best for network or storage or compute or whatever. There's very few who think they know best on this. So they're open to everyone's input and dialogue. And so just make sure that we're talking as much as we can and really bringing the combined powers together to help solve that customer problem.
Yeah, and Chris, I just want to double down on a point that you made, which is very, very true and very relevant. It's the partnership, right? We always say we're always gonna win together and win together with some of our most premier partners, and WWT being one of them. So again, as we kind of wrap, I hope everyone is as energized as I am with today's conversation. We covered a ton, right? We covered some AI hot takes, some facts. We covered, the partnership that we have with you guys, and really how SCs lead the charge, right? We have these discussions with a lot of our customers, and It's on us to really educate our customers and really partner with partners like you. And really for the team, really excited for our next session where we do bring in we keep the AI conversation going. We bring in Dr. Gaurav Khanna, John Cuneo, and Justin Perry, and really keep the momentum going and really excited to continue the partnership with you all. But thank you for your time again.